backgrounds, it is imperative that you help them understand the meaning of cultural boundaries and the impacts of racism on our lives. My aims are to assist you in helping the teenagers that you work with to discover the key elements of racism and to recognize their ability and duty to speak out against racism as it exists today. As community leaders, the most effective way of accomplishing this may be through education sessions and workshop exercises. Find creative ways of bringing the youth together and tell them that you'll buy them lots of pizza for lunch. To understand racism, we must define this and recognize its two key elements. According to Webster, racism is any program or practice of racial discrimination, segregation, persecution, and domination by another race. Now, the terms race and racial pertain to characteristics of a particular ethnic group. Two key elements are: one, the belief that one racial group is superior to another or others, and two, the ability or power to implement or act on that belief. Peter Bell has developed a curriculum for African American youth, and based on some of his work, I'm going to provide you with examples of exercises which you can implement in your communities. Also, it's important to keep in mind that these exercises can transfer to any ethnic group. But I'd also like to talk first about the meaning of boundaries and what it means for teenagers to cross boundaries, both personal and cultural. A boundary is a sense of separateness and individuality that prevents people from being too close, but it also allows for closeness whenever that's necessary. Boundaries help us to have an identity of our own. Some boundaries allow or prevent physical closeness, like somebody standing too close to us. For example, if someone, there are other boundaries, however, for teenagers to deal with that on a more personal level. For example, if someone asks a teenager, do your parents fight at home? Or have you ever been kicked out of school? These kinds of boundaries are called personal boundaries. We know that personal boundaries have been crossed when somebody gets too close, either with their body or with a certain question or a comment. And kids often find themselves wanting to say, get out of my face, or mind your own business. Now, cultural boundaries are different. Many African American teenagers have specific boundaries that touch on sensitive topics in the black community. For example, many American families are headed by a woman and there's no father around. This is a cultural boundary, and teenagers feel different talking about topics like this with their black friends than they do with their white friends. Why? Because these kinds of topics might reflect stereotypes that makes the black community look bad. When someone asks you a sensitive question or raises a touchy subject regarding race, the first question you have to answer for yourself is, what is this person's motivation? Or why did they ask this question? If someone asks an African American teenager about black people and crime, for example, they need to decide whether that person is being a racist or insensitive, is stereotyping, is asking a legitimate question, or is just making a comment. Remember that sometimes people ask insensitive questions about the black community, but they aren't always being mean about it. They just are not informed or perhaps educated about the black community and African American culture. Now, in terms of implementing a workshop or a seminar, remember, teenagers today are struggling with very different issues than when we were growing up. The world has become a more dangerous, more competitive, and a somewhat more insensitive place. Granted, times have certainly changed. It has gotten better in many ways. Yet bear in mind that we never had to walk through a metal detector or put our book bags through an x-ray machine just to go to school. Whatever facility you use, whether it's a gymnasium or a recreational community center, a church basement, or whatever, think about putting up posters around the room. It can be of athletes, of musicians, Hollywood stars, whatever, anything that might generate inclusiveness and a sense of unity amongst the group. I like to start with an exercise I call discovery. Begin this segment by asking the teenagers to give examples of racism. List their examples on a chalkboard if you're in a classroom, or newsprint that you might have set up on an easel stand like a flip chart. Whatever works for you. After putting together the list, go through one item at a time. Ask the teenagers to raise their hands if they have personally felt that kind of racism. This gets them thinking about the impact of racism right away, and also, what does this impact have on our lives? Or maybe you'll get them thinking about perhaps there are other factors or perceptions that influence what may or may not be racially motivated. Okay, it's important to get into boundaries soon into the program. Here's an exercise you can do to help explain the concept of boundaries. I call it Dare to Cross. Have all the teenagers pair up. Get them in partners. If somebody lacks a partner, you as the leader, the facilitator of the group, go ahead and join them as their partner. Now tell the partners to stand facing each other, however, on opposite sides of the room. Tell one group to walk towards the other. Explain that the stationary partner may say stop whenever they feel that the partner walking towards them is too close. Now repeat this process with the other group walking towards their partners. The second part to this is ask for one of the pairs to volunteer. Okay, so you can have the partners, one partner to volunteer, everyone else in the group will observe. And we're going to repeat this activity. Now tell one partner to walk towards the other, just like before, except now tell them to smile and walk casually towards the other person, who will say stop when they feel the partner is too close. Watch carefully where that person stops. Then repeat this, but this time have that first person who was just smiling put an angry look on their face and walk quickly towards their partner. Again, make note of where that person is asked to stop. The point you need to make to the teenagers is that boundaries are something that is very individual, and it can depend on a person's emotions. Usually people need a little bit less space if someone is approaching them and seems happy or in a good mood, but they are not willing to let an angry person come too close. After this exercise, point out that most of us like to have our own space and protect our own space. We want to know that others won't come into our own space if we don't want them to. Some people like to keep a lot of distance between themselves and other people. You see that sometimes when you're standing in line at the grocery store or at the NVA. You kind of keep a distance. Or at the post office, you never know. It's going to be different depending on where you are and what mood you're in, perhaps. So no matter how large or small our space is, we do have limits on that space that help us feel safe. This is a boundary. So discussing questions you can ask with the kids. You can talk with them a little bit and ask such things as, do you think you need more or less space than most people? Why? How does it make you feel when people cross your personal boundaries? And do you think it's a good idea to have personal boundaries and to know what your personal boundaries are? The obvious answer is yes, but allow the teens the opportunity to discover why this is the case. In terms of cultural boundaries, based on my earlier definitions, there are a couple of really excellent exercises that you can do. Pass out pens or pencils in a one-page activity. On the sheet, it would be called Dealing with a Question of Cultural Boundaries. And let them read that. The main question being asked is, how do you respond to a question or comment like this? A lot of black people are into crime and drugs, aren't they? Now, the two statements you want the kids to write about are, one, I think this question is motivated by what? They should go ahead and fill in the blanks. And two, my response to this question would be what? Again, let them fill in the blanks and write about it. Give them some time to complete these statements while in their own space. And then you can strategically place them in small groups and ask them to share their responses. Encourage the group members to give their own examples of ways that people might cross their cultural boundaries and ways of responding to them. And then discuss this exercise with the entire group. Bring everyone together. It is important that the teenagers know that there are